Okay, this is our unit on international wildlife management. So, little disclaimer here. I'm certainly not an expert on the issue of international wildlife management. I think you know I'm not an expert on anything in wildlife management, but I managed to get the job done a bit. We've been traveling internationally for a while now, and we always do an international trip that's focused on wildlife. So I have some experience with wildlife management techniques in lots of different places, and I just want to share some of them with you. Sit back. This is not going to be a short video. You could take it in chunks if you wanted to, but it should be a little bit more than just quote story time. It should be something to get you thinking about how things are done in other places. And as a reminder, we probably should look at how things are done here, right? So, way back in the very beginning of this semester, we talked about the North American wildlife management model, and I've kind of summarized it here. It's a little bit different than how I presented it in class, but it's the same basic concept. First, wildlife is owned by the public, and that means who your parents were, whether they were nobility or not, or whether you owned vast tracts of land. It made no difference. The public owns wildlife, not just the wealthy. And democracy of hunting, if I can remind you what that means, is everyone gets to participate in hunting as long as you've taken the class, you're the right age, oh, and you haven't committed a felony. And you've got that international resource concept here where we recognize that many of our wildlife species are not just owned by us as Americans, but are partially owned by Canadians, Mexicans, Central and South Americans as well. Wildlife can be killed, but only for legitimate purposes. We have some differing opinions on what legitimate purposes means. We talked about that in class. And they've eliminated or highly regulated all markets for hunting. So if you shoot an elk like that one there, it's very, very regulated what you can sell on that animal, and that's the way our model works. And finally, our policies are informed by science, not by tradition or politics. That's how it's supposed to work. If I can give you one comparison here, just to show you how other countries deal with this, our white-tailed deer is the large ungulate that roams across our continent, and kangaroos are the large ungulate that roams around Australia. Now, there's more than one species of kangaroo. In fact, there's, well, 48 species of megapoda, kangaroo or kangaroo type creatures. And white-tailed deer management in the United States is largely done by recreational hunting. So the state agencies would much rather sell you a license and you pay for the privilege of hunting a deer and reducing it to your possession, and then you get to have full benefit of that animal yourself. In Australia, where there are about 25 million people, and in order to maintain the population of some of the most common kangaroos, they need to shoot, are you ready? About 2 million individual kangaroos a year just to maintain or slow the growth of the population of kangaroos. There's just no way that recreational hunters would be able to do the job. So professional hunters step in. And that's something that may sound appealing to you, but also should sound a bit strange to you, because in the United States, professional hunters are mostly what we would call guides, right? Like most people don't hunt for a living, but that is a possibility in Australia. And the kangaroos are harvested by professionals, and then they are processed in facilities. And not only do the Australians consume them, in very low numbers, by the way. That mostly it's an export food. They ship kangaroo meat to about 55 countries, and then the leather is used as well. It's a light leather, but incredibly durable. So this resource is handled in completely different ways on each continent, partly because of our culture, but partly because of the realities of things. So if you wanted to become a kangaroo hunter, if you wanted to be a professional kangaroo shooter, maybe we should just say, in Australia, you would have to go through courses, much more rigorous than you would have to in the United States to get a hunting license. You have to show firearm proficiency. and the tags are all regulated. And of course, you're used to rules and regulations when it comes to things. And when you bring your animals to the processor, they can only accept ones that are headshot. So one of the things that the Canadian, that I just say Canadian, the Southern Canadians, the Australians, have mandated is they want this process to be humane. So if you are bad at what you do, you lose your license, and you have to account for all of your tags and yada yada. And a headshot presumably is a one-shot quick kill, and that's the idea there. I did actually eat kangaroo when I was in Australia. My brother lives there, and he had to hunt for it. I shouldn't have used that word, in the supermarket in order to find it. Most Australians do not eat kangaroo. Most Australian dogs eat kangaroo. Some of our modern wildlife management goals would include sustainable populations of native species. We very much favor native species over introduced ones. We would like to save habitats large enough to host a complete suite of wildlife. That's not always possible, so you try for the largest habitat you can and then the most complete group of wildlife that you can. Think of Yellowstone, for example. Yellowstone is large enough to host every species that traditionally lived in Yellowstone before European involvement there. So the wolves were the last animal that needed to be brought back to that ecosystem. And my favorite, cultural carrying capacity, trying to raise that to the biological one. Now, some of you guys heard me talk about cultural carrying capacity again when you presented your wildlife management plans, but just as a reminder here, the biological carrying capacity for almost every species is higher than the cultural carrying capacity. So, one of the goals of wildlife management is often to raise that cultural carrying capacity to at or as close to biological carrying capacity as possible. Would people tolerate or value or wish to aspire to, boy, I'm screwing up totally today, uh, a complete breakdown of this video? Would people be interested in having a population as high as the land can hold? That's all we're talking about why raising the cultural carrying capacity. And some of the reasons they wouldn't is the deer, for example, eat all my bushes. They eat the crops. They run out in front of my car. Predators would be another one that's easy to explain why the cultural carrying capacity would be lower than the biological one. Yeah, sorry for that screw up. This is a map that shows the places that we've traveled to. So I mentioned international travel, and I had to put a bunch of stars in the United States. I've been to 48 states. My wife and I used to live in Hawaii. We've lived in Utah, so I've got a fair amount of North American travel as well. But this is a bit of what we've been able to accomplish. And I'd like to share with you again that these genuinely are family trips. Like, I do travel for work sometimes, and Morris Sullivan and I did take a group of students to South Africa last summer. But for the most part, this is what I do for recreation. And uh, we're often traveling with our daughter Danica. You'll see some other pictures of her as well. And my focus really is wildlife. Like, I don't mind meeting people and I don't mind looking at plants and trying new foods out, but it's really about wildlife. And when I think of wildlife, I think of mammals and birds. If we see a snake, that's cool too. Frogs, have at it, but I'm really focused on these. And it's my vacation, so I'm not making excuses for myself, but these are the big draws for me. Hey, I should have mentioned earlier that all of these photos are mine, and now while we're looking at these four birds right here, I'd at least like to give myself credit for that. We're looking at Brazil, a couple Australian ones, and then Kenya in this montage. And speaking of Kenya, let's head to East Africa first. So those are the countries that are part of what are considered East Africa. And we've been to East Africa twice. So let me just give you the who, what, when. In August of 2011, the three of us traveled to Kenya and Tanzania. And in 2017, we went to Rwanda, Uganda, and Kenya. How do you do something like that? Well, let me just tell you that when you Google Kenya Safari, there are approximately 76 million results that come up. Now, I know all of them can't possibly be about Kenya safaris, but that should just give you an idea of how overwhelming some of this is just to start with. I get that question a lot. How do you even decide who to go with? Well, in 2011, we went with a locally owned safari company. It was a gentleman who had been a guide for decades, and he opened up his own business. He had three vehicles, and it was a very small operation, and we loved it because we were just pumping our money right into the local economy instead of going through a middleman. In 2017, we ended up having to go with a bigger company, G Adventures. They're partners with National Geographic. But look at what their mission is. They focus on small group experiences, commitments to authentic travel, and they support local businesses. And we just could not find a local company that would allow us to do what we wanted to in 2017. So we did feel good about being able to support a company that looks like it has some good values. In our African adventures, we've also, I just mentioned, have been to South Africa as well. The accommodations on safari are often pretty plush compared to what you would think. So, like, for example, we're sleeping in tents, but the tent is underneath a giant roof, and there's a bathroom with running water in it and electricity. So it has to be a tent because they can't build permanent structures. It's just a weird kind of thing to get around. Hey, by the way, can I just show you? This is our welcome mat down here, and we have the tent zippered up, and then you put the welcome mat over it. That's to help keep the baboons from unzipping your tent and getting inside. And then in other places, they can put permanent structures, and they're just, I don't know. I want to use the word extravagant. For anybody that's ever camped before, this is nothing like that. Often there's a pool at the place. You have to give people amenities. They're traveling a long way, and often the people that travel are much wealthier than my family, and they're used to that sort of thing, that being pampered stuff. This is the go-to game viewer safari vehicle in East Africa. You've got a vehicle with lots of windows, and you've got a roof that can raise and pop up so that you can look out. And this is what the scene can look like at times. I want to show you this because I want you to see that every animal photo that I show you is carefully cropped to give you an impression of what I want you to see. But this was our first leopard, for example, in 2011, and we shared that leopard sighting with about 50 other vehicles, and it was crazy. And there were people complaining, kind of drivers yelling at each other. You cut me off, and you tell your people to sit down. My people can't see. We're always polite when we're on safari and do a little bit of people watching as well as wildlife watching. A lot of African uh, wildlife experiences, safaris, are based on the concept of the Big Five. The Big Five were the five animals that were most dangerous to hunt on foot. And here they are, in case you don't know what they are: lion, leopard, elephant, rhino, either species, and then the Cape buffalo. And that concept of the Big Five still carries over today, although most people are shooting them with Nikon cameras instead of rifles. So there are safari companies, for example, named the Big Five. Or as soon as you start reading somebody's page about uh, safari, they'll say, "We guarantee the Big Five," or "We work our hardest to find the Big Five." And what we will often do when we're trying to select some company is to make sure that they understand that we, of course, want to see big animals, but we want to see the little ones as well. That I am just as excited watching mongoose hunt as I am watching a lion hunt. And I can honestly say that, especially after I've been to Africa a few times. I don't want to say anything gets boring. It certainly doesn't. But you always crave for new experiences, different stuff. Watching a herd of zebras, fantastic. Oh, sorry, they're not in the Big Five. Well, slow down. We want to have a look at these guys as well. And I do also want to point out that the Big Five it doesn't include all kinds of other dangerous things. Hippos, for example, or the Nile crocodile here. I love this picture. This he's just side eyeing me right there, and give it looks like he's in motion. You know, he's got that leg up, and you can see all those teeth. There's all kinds of great stuff that you can see besides just the big five. What wildlife management often boils down to is what is the value of wildlife. So maybe that's not something you end up having to ask yourself. I just want to say it this way. Most of my students already have decided that nature is valuable to them, whether it's wildlife specifically or grand scenics or just being out and about. Doesn't make any difference to me exactly what trips your trigger, as long as it's something that's natural. So you have been valuing nature for so long that it's hard for you sometimes to even remember that you should be able to justify that. You should have to explain why it's valuable. And wildlife in some of these poorer parts of the world has to prove its value in one way or the other. So, for example, if I can get more people to pay to come and look at this lion over and over again than I can get from somebody coming and shooting it, then this lion has greater value alive than it does dead. And that's one of the beauties of non-consumptive wildlife is because if I don't kill this animal, someone else can come and look at it again tomorrow. And we can view the same individual over and over again and get money out of it. Well, the difference here is somebody might pay 40 grand to kill a lion. No one's going to pay 40 grand to look at one. So you're going for one big payoff versus lots of smaller payoffs, and that's the difference in the models there. Of course, I want to remind you too that there's value to the local residents in these animals. There's a lot of meat on this animal. There's a hide there as well. This is a wildebeest. If anybody's seen Lion King, you know the wildebeest. I still haven't forgiven them for that tragic death. But I have to be able to somehow transfer that value to the local people, right? So that they don't kill the wildlife and reduce it to possession. And that's especially true with animals that have uh, parts that can be sold for big money. I think this is the largest tusker that I've ever photographed. This was on our first trip to Kenya. This is in Amboseli National Park, famous for its big old elephants, and tusker is the name that they call them. And there's a lot of ivory there. That individual could be worth a lot on the black market or on a legal market if we allowed ivory to be sold. What you have to do is be able to create an industry that makes that ivory on that elephant more valuable than it is off of it. And of course, the problem is one person can kill that elephant and gain all of the value at once. And so built into your system has to be protections. So all of these African parks have anti-poaching measures, and it's a whole industry into itself. So it costs money to go on safari because you're not just paying for your guide and the vehicle and the food and the lodging. You're also paying for the community to get some money. You're paying for the anti-poaching, the rangers, all that sort of thing as well. Rhino horn is a current hot spot. They have seems to me in the research that I've done that ivory poaching is sort of on the decline at the moment, but rhino horn poaching is on the rise, especially in South Africa. So we're talking about an animal here that really could disappear in the wild in your lifetime. And there's something about that horn that people think is magical, literally. So they cut off the horns, and then they use that material for all kinds of things. Handles on daggers, so I can show how manly I am. And they make little cups out of them. They call them hangover cups, basically. So if you're not feeling good, whatever you drink out of that rhino horn will give you, will make you feel better. It's just a little bit a little bit much for me to talk about today. I'm already on a roll. So I talked about how this has to somehow translate to the local community. So on this last time that we went to East Africa, we were in Rwanda, and part of our trip was to, or one afternoon we went to visit this village. Now I just want to. I'm gonna say this as best I possibly can. It's a little different when I say it live in class and my words are gone in a second. Now you can watch this over and over again. I gotta be a little careful how I say it. If I had my choice, going to see a recreation like this would not be on my top 10 things to do. It's another afternoon where I could be going out and looking for wildlife, bird watching, photographing. Not that I'm not interested in the culture, but I always worry when I go to something like this, how authentic is it? How staged is it? Are they doing this out of their own free will? Are they making fun of me after I leave? You know what I mean? Like it's just there's a little bit of this that feels like they're putting on a show for all these wealthy white people that come, and maybe they're resentful of it in the long term. Does that make sense? Do you understand what I'm getting at? There's a cultural imbalance here that I recognize. But the idea is that what's supposed to be happening here is they're proud of their culture. They're proud of their history, like most people are. Well, I'm not proud of every single thing that people of my culture have done over the years, but in general, I'd like to see things kept alive. I go to Genesee Country Village there and see how things used to be a couple hundred years ago. But in addition, it really gives them a source of income. It gives them jobs. And in the past, this village where these people lived mostly got their food and their money from poaching. So if I come and support this, and then maybe even leave a donation in addition to it, or give some tips to the performers, they're getting cash in hand from tourists that are coming to see the wildlife. So it's helping in both directions. It's getting them to see that the wildlife is better off alive, because people aren't going to keep coming if the wildlife is too scarce. And they genuinely did seem to enjoy what they were doing. They were extremely knowledgeable about their past. I don't think they were pretending that this is how I live every day, sort of thing. I think that's sort of my dividing line here is they came to us and they said, "Come, let us show you how things used to be." And that's how it was. Look, he's got modern clothes underneath sort of a traditional dress there, and we had a really good time. It was a nice experience. Let me give you an idea of how big tourism is in East Africa, and all these numbers are in U.S. dollars. That's what USD means here. So none of these numbers are exactly accurate because of a couple factors. One, every country kind of measures things a little bit differently. And then two, some of the numbers, like Kenya's number, might be from 2018. Uganda's number might be from 2017, that sort of thing. But my goodness, $1.2 billion dollars in Kenya alone from 1.5 million visitors. Like, do the math on that. Each visitor is spending a ton of money to come to Kenya. Uganda, which is not necessarily known around the world as a great tourism spot, is getting even more money from even fewer visitors, and I'll explain why in just a minute. And then is uh, Tanzania is where the Maasai uh, meets the Serengeti. So you've got a couple things in Tanzania that are really famous. The Serengeti Plains is something that everyone knows about. And then Rwanda is a tiny country, and they're only $500 million. But the only statistic that I could find was all visitors to Rwanda, and only about a quarter of this money was for people on holiday. So these numbers are probably closer to what people are doing to come and visit as a tourist, and this number is people that are coming to visit to do business as well as being a tourist. And you can see here by this headline that their revenue is going up and up and up. Of course, not right at the moment, right? I mean, I know we're all in the midst of something crazy right at the moment, but um, Kenya is building an economy around wildlife tourism instead of wildlife trophy hunting. And I've got a cool example here for you. So let me just tell you this story. QENP, Queen Elizabeth National Park in Uganda. So we went and visited this park a couple days in a row. And it was interesting because we had a guide. His name was Paul. And he's got that cool vehicle, right? I showed you that green vehicle earlier. And we're a small group with G Adventures, as we're supposed to be. And we go to Queen Elizabeth National Park. And Paul is a very competent guide. He's very extremely knowledgeable, can cite things, knows the natural history. But when you show up at this national park, you have to have one of the rangers escort you. Now, there's a couple reasons for that. One is the ranger makes sure that you are following the rules, right? So that way, our guide Paul, we can't slip him a couple extra bucks and have him go off in an area where he's not supposed to go or whatever. And secondly, by doing a system like that, you're also encouraging local jobs. Paul didn't live locally. He was from Uganda, but he wasn't from that community. The rangers that work there were right from that community, and it helps pump money right into the local economy. Now, there's an exception. You do not have to have a ranger in your vehicle if you're a local. So when the tourists came, the ranger would come in and come in our vehicle and drive off with us. But the locals were allowed to visit the national park. They still had to pay an entrance fee, a smaller one than we paid, but they didn't have to have a ranger with them. What they did was followed behind a vehicle that had a ranger in it. And at first I thought, well, that's interesting. Does that mean that they don't value locals as much because the locals don't get to have all the knowledge of the ranger? I think it was actually the opposite. I think it was putting less of a burden on the locals, encouraging them to come and enjoy their own national park without having to pay extra money and without having to be, I don't want to say talked down to, but talked at, right? Like a lot of the locals probably were very knowledgeable about their own place. Anyway, so we pull up on one day, and we get a ranger. It happens to be a female ranger, and she jumps into the front seat. And waiting there was a taxi, and the taxi had a man and a woman in it. And the ranger comes in, and she says, "We have a vehicle following behind us." And I said something like, "Wow, somebody took a taxi here," and she says, "Oh, no, no, no. The taxi driver is here on a date." So he's off duty, and I looked in the vehicle, and boy, they were both super dressed up, like they looked like Easter Sunday in the front of that taxi. So we're driving around, and we did see some cool things. And we get to this spot, and there's already a few vehicles parked there, and there's a leopard up in this giant tree, this cactus-looking tree, right? And I've circled them for you because it's a little bit hard to see. But can you all see the leopard in here, right? Here's the spots. So we sit and wait, and it's a little bit boring because you can't see too much. And then there's times when she would move, the leopard, and you couldn't see her at all. And finally, the vehicles are leaving and leaving, and our driver keeps looking at our ranger, and she says, "Just wait." And so a little bit while goes by, and she says, "Just wait." And it's been a half hour now. So I'm getting little glimpses of the leopard, but I'm also looking around. I'm doing a lot of birding, and I'm fine. I'm patient, and sometimes you just trust people even if you don't know what's what. And everybody else leaves now except our vehicle and the taxi. They have to wait for us. And I don't know if they have any idea what's going on at all in their vehicle. So once everyone else is gone, the ranger says something to the driver in a language that I don't understand, and we drive off the road and we start heading towards this tree. Now, I do want to point out that you are allowed to do that. The ranger can decide at any time to drive in any spot, but it's up to them. It's only up to them. We can't do that. That's not our decision to make. So here we go around this tree with this car behind us, this taxi, right? And as we come around the tree, look at the picture that I got. Oh my God, this was my greatest leopard sighting ever. And look how close we are, and we're like, ah, and we're driving around it, and it's just us in our vehicle, click, 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 and then the taxi comes behind us, and I can just see the woman's eyes are gigantic as they're looking at this. It was so cool. We drive around the tree, we get back on the road, and everybody in our vehicle is just chatter, chatter, chatter. You can just imagine how excited everybody was, especially after being patient for so long, sitting there, and we had no idea that this special thing was going to happen. And the ranger in the front of the vehicle turns around to us and she says, "Someone is going to have a good night tonight." And she's talking about the guy who brought his date. And I'm really convinced like she was the wingman on this whole thing. Like this was completely just for that guy who was on his date, and he owes that woman a lot. Maybe maybe more than she knew. In Rwanda, we went to a place that was probably the most efficient ecotourism thing that I've ever been involved with, and I don't want to overstate that. And I'm trying to think as I'm making that claim. This was absolutely amazing. So Rwanda, small country, devastating genocide in the 90s that their country still has an impact for today. Volcanoes National Park is home to two primates, mountain gorillas and golden monkeys that are endangered. So they've built this tourist industry around both of these. And I just want to point out to you that just having one of those would be cool. But the fact that they've been able to build it around these two different ones allows people to come in and do 2 full days. You schedule your golden monkeys on one day and you schedule your gorillas on the other day. And if they had only had one of these, they'd have to figure out something else to do with the people. Does that make sense? So this is where we went and visited. We did the gorillas in the morning, and then we go visit the cultural village in the afternoon. We do the next day we go and see Diane Fossey's organization, and then in the afternoon we go see the golden monkeys sort of thing. So they've got everything planned out so that you're there and you're occupied and you feel like you've gotten your money's worth sort of thing. Um, my computer's acting a little slow this morning, making me nervous. Here's the golden monkey, and they're endangered. And what I want to tell you, I'm going to use the word habituated. I'm going to use it twice. Is there's a whole deal around finding these monkeys. So we had to join a group and they trek us into the jungle, and they've got spotters there. They've got people that kind of go in early and find the troop of golden monkeys and by radio lead us to them. And it was sort of large. Like I think we were in a group of about 30, 35 people, which felt very large, even though we had a lot of room to spread out. And we weren't the only group there. There was another group there as well. This troop of golden monkeys are habituated, which means not that they're tame, not that they're domesticated, but they act naturally even when there's people around. And they gave us some advice on what to do and not making fast motions. You're not trying to touch them. You don't try to feed them. You just stand around and watch them. Take as many pictures as you want, but you're not engaging in them. You don't walk towards them. They can go about their business. You just pretend you're an observer there. So while we were following these guys, they conduct a raid. They climb over this big rock wall that separates the jungle from the potato fields, and we climb the rock wall after them. And here's this troop of monkeys stealing potatoes. Now, in this part of Africa, they call what we call potatoes, they call them Irish potatoes to differentiate them from sweet potatoes. And in these potato fields are owned by the village, not by any one individual. And everybody has to take turns patrolling and trying to keep these animals out. Well, part of the deal here is that the money that we paid to take our Golden Monkey tour gets put into a fund that reimburses the village for the potatoes that get eaten. While we're here, The people are walking all over the potatoes. So I don't know if you know about growing potatoes, but they grow them in mounds, and I'm carefully walking between the mounds. I'm using the footpaths that the farmers use, and just these ignorant tourists are just trampling all over these people's livelihood. And I assume that they're getting compensated for that as well. But it just seemed so intrusive to me. And then comes the farmers, and I don't know if you can see the farmer on the left there in the background, but this kid's, I don't know, 8 years old, wearing maybe all of the clothes he owns, which includes just one boot. And they were carrying, he was there with another younger boy, maybe 5, and they had these sticks with a nail in the end of them, which gives me the idea of what they do when the tourists aren't there. So they're going to chase off the monkeys when we're not there, but when we're there, they stand around and they got to watch. And then an adult came over and he stood and he talked and talked and talked with our guide, and they all looked relaxed, and our guide assured us that this system works very well, that the people are compensated for the potatoes that are lost, and that would be a great system, right? Because it allows this endangered species to still exist, and the villagers don't have to just suffer because of it. And they're not inclined to go and poach them because they're eating their potatoes, because they're still getting compensated. Now, I don't know a single farmer that would rather have the government give them a handout than for them to grow their crops properly. But think about this as a compromise where you're not going to kill the local wildlife just for your pride, right? That you can figure out a way to make this work for both of you guys. So I hope that was the case. That's going to be the theme for all of this is if the system doesn't work right or if people are corrupt, then it doesn't really work. But we were assured that it did. So I have to take that at face value. I'm going to tell you it cost us $100 per ticket to go and see those golden monkeys. And as soon as we encountered the troop, they started a stopwatch, and we got to spend an hour with them. So they do one tour in the morning, and then they do one tour in the afternoon. If this group, I said there was about 35 of us in our group, and then there was another group, sorry, and they were looking at a different troop of monkeys. So let's say they can bring in $3,500 every morning and another $3,500 every afternoon. And they've got 2 troops of monkeys. So double that. That's 14 grand a day just coming from the uh, the golden monkeys. Well, with that, you've got to pay for all of the people, and you got to pay for the potatoes to get eaten, and yada yada. The gorillas are different. The gorillas are more expensive, as you would guess. Want to take a guess how much it costs for a gorilla permit? Well, they've doubled the price since we were there. It is now $1,600 per person for 1 hour with gorillas. They allow a group of 8 to go at a time, and the idea is there's eight people and 2 guides, so 10 folks arrive, and they've got 10 groups of gorillas that are habituated. I used that word before. I'm going to show it to you here. There's 10 troops of gorillas that are habituated in this park. 2 of them are reserved for research only. The other 8 get 8 paying tourists each day times $1,600 times 365 days a year. This is a multi-million-dollar operation on the side of this volcano in Rwanda. And this only works because the gorillas allow people to be close to them, right? So they're habituated to human presence. This gentleman right here was not part of our group. He's a tracker. So each troop of gorillas has a set of trackers. I think there were four gentlemen that were there for us, for our group. And these guys follow the gorillas all day long. They have to locate them in the morning and then follow them. And they're in radio contact with the guides as they bring the tourists up. And then after we leave for the day, we're there for 1 hour. After we leave, no one else comes and visits them. They don't have a morning shift and an afternoon shift like they're able to do at the Goldens. And the trackers have to stay with them for the rest of the day, find out where they're going to sleep, and then they go back to the village and sleep. And then they get up again in the morning, go back to where they had located the gorillas, and they got to get on them. And it only works partly because the gorillas are used to us, but because of the skill of these individuals. Imagine that we would pay $1,600 to just wander around in the jungle hoping to find a gorilla. That you're not gonna sell enough tickets to be able to do that, right? That isn't gonna work that way. In addition to that, I told you that they had a whole that Diane Fossey I mentioned. She's the woman here. You can see a couple pictures here. She's the redhead. This is the woman from the movie Gorillas in the Mist. She's like the Jane Goodall for gorillas. She's the first one that came and habituated gorillas to her presence. She was actually killed by poachers because she spoke out against them. And I think in the end here, would be vindicated, and all of her work has really led to this giant industry here today. She, by the way, developed this technique to tell individual gorillas apart by the markings on their nose. So that's what you see above is the pattern on the nose there. See all this? You should be able to spot that in there. So here's what it looked like for us. We pull up at this dirt parking lot, and you can see there's a little craft shop across the way there. And these are porters. Porters are people that would carry your bags for you. And I must say that I am strong enough to carry my own gear, and I don't need a porter. But paying this guy $10 to carry my bag for the day means he gets $10 of income that he otherwise wouldn't. This ended up being my porter right here. His name was John, and Laura actually chose this woman because she was a woman, and she was the only woman there that day. I ended up spending a lot of time talking to him, and he said that he does this as often as he possibly can, but there's more people that want to do this job than they have openings for. So he is allowed to show up once a month for this. And the uniform that he's wearing has a name tag on it, but it's attached with Velcro. So he goes home with the Velcroed name tag. The uniform gets worn by somebody else the next day. They don't own that. And so the $10 that I paid him, if I didn't hire somebody to carry my bag that day, he would not have earned any money from this job this month. I'm not saying it's his only job. I don't pretend to know the whole story here. But in addition to that, I'm just going to tell you too, we tipped him. We tipped all of our guides, our porters. I gave him all the food that I had brought to eat. I didn't end up eating any of it. I just gave it all to him. How do you not? We had to walk from the village past all of their potato fields, then up and into the jungle. So the potatoes are a nice crop to grow in volcanic soil. Volcanic soil is very dark and rich and nutrient laden, and just a good crop for volcanic soil. And you can see us all standing here, and we're about to get our instructions, and none of us are wearing a backpack because our porters are all carrying those for us. And the rock wall there separates the village land from the national park essentially, and it will keep out the largest grazing animals, but it certainly isn't going to keep out any primate. That's for sure. And the gentleman here that's giving us the instructions told us two things. He told us that if a gorilla approaches you, to stop, and then if it keeps coming towards you, to move out of its way. And I need to tell you right now before we finish this story that I only remembered the first of those two instructions. I did not remember the second one. So we didn't have to hike for very long. We hiked for about an hour before we got to the gorillas. We had a couple that were staying at our lodge, and they had to hike 8 hours to get to their troop of gorillas. So we were pretty fortunate. They came out by flashlight, which they call torches in the rest of the world. So torchlight, but flashlight. And the it was just amazing. I have to tell you that being with gorillas in the wild was just an absolutely amazing, almost spiritual kind of an experience. They're clever, intelligent, ridiculously lovable creatures here. And the group that we went to see, that we were assigned, had two silverback gorillas in it, and the one that was the dominant silverback, they had nicknamed him the President, and it was kind of cool. So he was sitting here in this spot, and then he ends up wandering off. And you've heard them called silverbacks. So there's the silverback. They actually grow, their hair turns white like that as they get mature. And after he left, I kind of crawled over and I was putting my hand down in the spot where he was sitting. And the guide says, "You want to sit in the spot the president sat?" And I said, "Yeah, I wouldn't mind." And he says, "You may." So I sat down in the same exact spot where the silverback was and could feel his. It was a worn spot, so it was obviously a favorite spot of his. Anyway, we have this experience where we're in the jungle here with them, and as they move, we have to sort of move with them. So they start moving down this slope, and the whole group, I'm not gonna, I don't know how to say this. The whole group is just following our guide. We have a special gorilla guide this day, and they're just like following right behind him. You've seen people; they hike way too close to each other, and they're not paying attention to anything. This man will lead us to where to go. Meantime, I'm kind of taking my time and I'm looking around, and I can see where the gorillas are going, right? So our guide is taking us on the easiest way, but not the most direct route. So I kind of pause and I take a couple steps down this little steep spot. And he turns and looks at me. He goes, "John, you may go ahead, go down." So he can see that I'm figuring out, sort of like an angle of pursuit drill from high school football. I can see where the gorillas are headed. I'm gonna walk down and kind of head them off. So he tells me I may. I go down this steep spot, and I'm first in line. My wife is behind me, and then there's other gentleman who was on the trip with us that we hadn't met before is third in line. And as I'm going down, I've got my eye on this other silverback gorilla, and I'm watching him so carefully because I don't want to see how he's going to react to me, to the point where I don't even notice that there's a female gorilla in the tree above me until she starts walking down the edge of a branch. I swear to God, this happened. She starts walking down this branch, and as she gets farther out on the branch, her weight makes the branch drop. It was just like in a cartoon where the branch comes down, she gets off the branch springs back up into the air, and she starts walking towards me. Now I remembered him saying, "Don't approach them, just stand still." I forgot the part where he said to back away. So I'm standing perfectly still, and she's obviously on a trail. That's why I had stopped there. It was a nice clear spot. And I'm not moving, I'm not moving, she's walking. And as she walks by me, she brushes against my leg. Now, all I'm thinking at this time is how special I am. I had just had a gorilla touch me. Like, you're not supposed to reach out and touch them. But it reached out and it brushed against me. And all I can think of is how exciting that was, how cool that was. I didn't realize that perhaps I was being a little gorilla disrespectful by not getting out of her way. And maybe the brushing against me wasn't, "We're friends." It was, "Dude, you're supposed to move. I'm the gorilla." So the guide now has caught up to us, and the rest of the people are coming down the slope. And Danica is now the fourth one in line, and he says to us, he's encouraging us all to sit down. So we all go and we sit down, and we've got our legs stretched out in front of us, and the rest of the people are still coming down. We've got 8 in our group, as I said. So 4 of us are there, the 3 Vannials and the one guy, and the rest of the group is coming. And there's the silverback that I had been watching gets up and he starts to walk. Before I show you the rest of what happened here, I want to show you the skeleton of an adult male gorilla. And I want to remind you from Con 102 that we talked about the sagittal crest as being the place where the jaw muscles attach to. Have a look at what it looks like underneath the fur of a mountain gorilla. Gigantic jaw muscles. Oh, and look at the teeth that they've got in the front. Not to mention the bones here on the neck muscles, the back muscles, how strong gorillas are, right? This is no joke having a silverback in the area, right? Okay. So I take out my cell phone to videotape this mountain gorilla coming towards me. And I have to tell you, something's a little bit wrong with the video. I'm not entirely sure, but I'm going to do my best to try to get you guys to see this here. And I will play it. And for some reason, when I was previewing this, it was in slow motion, which sort of makes it look even cooler. But then all of a sudden, it goes fast, like halfway through it. So let's see what happens here. Well, the audio's not lined up with the video. Oh boy, this is going to be a train wreck. This is going to be a train wreck, people. I'm going to try it, though.
Please don't miss this picture in front of me.
So that's the guy yelling at the gorilla.
John, that's what you wanted.
I'm so sorry. This is where I knew I was in trouble, when he comes and stares at me. And that's the part of the video that I gotta... Oh no, discard that. Let's try this again.
Please don't miss this picture in front of me.
So this gorilla had his eye on me because I disrespected that female. And he went from walking past us to turning. He's staring right at me right now. These 2 knees are my wife's right here. This is, I forgot what this guy's name was that was on our trip with us. This is him. He was a pretty tall guy. His feet stick out a little bit longer. And this is where the video gets all crazy. But I found that if I back it up, just back it up, it'll play normal. Well, it'll play slow motion. Ladies and gentlemen, I got run over by a mountain gorilla. This guy put his front arms over my legs and kicked me with both of his back legs. And as he got past me, he started, now you'll start seeing the vegetation, throwing vegetation up in the air, grabbing leaf litter, shaking branches, and yelling. I hope this is all worth watching. I can't believe how terrible this technology is. I couldn't figure it out. I'm so sorry. There's the female, and that's him reclaiming his dominance and telling me he's boss. It was scary. I remained calm. The guide afterwards is patting me on the shoulder and telling me, "You did perfect. You stayed still." Like, can you imagine if I tried to tuck up or if I tried to push away at him or something? It could have been really disastrous. I'm so sorry this is in slow motion. I don't know how to fix it. So I don't know. I don't know if you could hear the audio there and tell that Laura started crying. Danica started crying. It was just I stood up and I was like, oh, that's cool, it's cool. I stood up. My legs were shaking so much I could not take a step. I I can't tell you how that felt physically. And I realized I couldn't walk, so I asked the guy a question, and he stopped and answered it. And by the time he got done answering the question, I was able to get my stuff together again and do that. Anyway, yeah, I paid money to have that happen. I just want to say that. So let me show you how they do things in some parts of India. I don't pretend to be an entire expert on India or how they manage tigers in India, but I will tell you about this national park that we visited in India called Tadoba. Tadoba National Park is gigantic. Only 20% of the entire park is open to tourists, and it's only open for 4 hours in the morning and 4 hours in the afternoon. 80% of the park people can't go to, and the 20% that they can go to, 16 of the 24 hours the animals have to themselves. I believe this is the only picture I did not take in this PowerPoint. There were all kinds of cool things to see there. Well, you can't have tigers without stuff for tigers to eat. So here is a sambar deer in the top. Looks a little bit like our elk. And then a spotted deer or an axis deer down here at the bottom. Fun fact, they keep their spots their whole life, not just when they're fawns. There are a couple antelope species as well, including the largest bovine on the planet, the gar here. That's an adult male. And that young one there on the bottom right is actually running from a tiger while I took that picture. Here's the tiger that was stalking him. And we had great tiger encounters. We saw tigers every day except our first. It was perfect because our first day we didn't get to see one, and that just enhanced the anticipation there. I have such a respect for all of the people that were involved in this whole thing. The professional way that they treated these animals and how the animals always came first was just absolutely amazing. I'm going to call this our tiger team, although there is somebody missing here. So I'm taking a selfie with the forbidden cell phone. You're not allowed to have cell phones in the national park because people don't pay enough attention. This is our guide from the lodge, and he spoke perfect English, educated in England, knew expert in wildlife and nature and that sort of thing. And then this is Kishore. Kishore was the local guide, and then we had a driver in addition to this. And the way this system works is there's there's two of us in a Jeep, right? You saw what the Jeep looked like. Hey, I'm not going all the way back. We're in this open Jeep, it's just my wife and I for most of the time. Sometimes we had other people in there. And then our our uh, our guide is there with us from the lodge to help navigate and look out for us sort of thing, right? The language and that sort of thing. And then you've got a local guide and a driver on top of it. So we're being catered to by three people. Well, the local guide and the driver have to come from the village. The government provides training for both of those things, how to be a guide and how to be a driver. And you can't go in the national park unless you are in a vehicle that is driven by a local driver and has a local guide. So we pay our entrance fee to get in. Those are strictly controlled. They only let so many people in every day, and they're tied to you as an individual. So we had to turn in our passports every single day, and they matched the name on the ticket to the name in the passport. And that's how you don't get people buying these tickets up and then scalping them. Can you imagine? So we had to get our tickets months and months in advance. The lodge we were staying at organized all of that stuff for us, and we're providing jobs for local individuals, and they were great. I have to tell you, our guy was fantastic. Sharna was the name of our guide from the lodge, the guy with the mustache. But Kishore was the one that was spotting all the tigers because that's his literal job. Sharna had to do all kinds of other things as well. So what would happen is these guys don't use radios. There's no radios in the vehicles, but it's all like sign language as two vehicles pass each other. And I can't believe how efficient that was. Like we'd be driving along and they'd see another Jeep driving on another dirt road, and they'd tell how fast that guy was going, which direction he was going. They knew where he was headed, and they knew which tiger is in that area that they're headed towards. And often we'd be going along, and somebody had gotten word that there was a tiger seen, and so our guide would turn to us and he would say, "Sir, ma'am, sit." And we would sit down and off we'd go. It was like playing Mario Karts in a dust storm. And they were just absolutely fantastic for us. We got so close to tigers so many times because of how good our guides were, and never in a way that put the tigers in jeopardy, sort of thing. You got to stay on the roads, and the rules are very clear. If the tiger's on the road, they have right of way, and yada yada. It's all a fascinating thing. But all I can say is this: we were in the perfect spot so many times. It couldn't have been just luck. It was skill. Now, this is the closest that we got to a tiger. I am standing up on the bench seat in the open Jeep with no doors on it. And the object that you see in the bottom left part that's almost ruining my picture there, that's the seat of the Jeep. So you can see that it's not like some telephoto lens trick here. When this tiger passed by us, Shvarna, our guide, turned to me and he smiled and he said, "Your feet were sticking out over the seat," right? So like my heels and the soles of my feet, but the toes of my boots were out over that. He said, "A tiger just walked underneath your toes." It was pretty cool. I mentioned this part already, so I don't have to do it again. But they definitely made sure that you were the person that was supposed to be for all of these things. And this is what I mean about being in the right place at the right time. It's crowded, but we were first in line almost every single time. We weren't the third or fourth Jeep back. This scene looks exactly the same to these people as this does to us, right? So, in other words, there's all kinds of Jeeps on this side of the road as well. I want to point out just a couple things to you. First, down here is a cameraman filming for National Geographic. I would love to think that someday I would see myself in a National Geographic special. And then, secondly, and I want to say this well, and I don't want anybody to take this the wrong way. One of the reasons we chose this national park to go to is I had read a trip report by someone, and he said, uh, this is where Indians go when they want to go see tigers. And I said to my wife, we've only got a short time. We spent 8 days here, and we didn't go anywhere except this park. I said, we're going to get a much better cultural experience if we go where the locals go. So look at this picture. There doesn't appear to be anyone in this picture that's not from India. We often stood out. People took pictures of us because we were different. We were the only white people often in the crew. There's another option if you can't hire a Jeep and take that privatey kind of a thing where they allow buses to come in and they're able to have an experience this way. It's much more affordable, and this particular bus didn't have many people on it. This was a cold, rainy day by India standards, and that's why it's so empty. But on the good weather days, these were jam packed. Again, you gotta let people that don't have a lot of money see the value in these things too. Get excited about these tigers also. It was cool. There was one paved road in the entire park. On a cold, rainy day, like I just showed you there, the tigers were kind of drawn to it because of the heat on the pavement there. And there's a mother with her three cubs of the year. She's got a radio collar on, as you can see. And we would start our days before dawn. We'd be queued up and ready to go. And we'd have our afternoon safari as well. Hey, that's about an hour right there. If you're looking to do a break, this might be a good time to break. But don't just take a break and not come back. Come back, okay? I want to show you one other ecotourism model from Chile. Patagonia is at the very south end of Chile, and I traveled there in 2017 specifically because I wanted to see pumas. I wanted to see mountain lions. And the place that I stayed at, the ranch that I stayed at, was this one right here. This is the view that I had from my room. And I went through a company called Southwild. Dr. Charles Moon is the owner of this, and I would call him an ecotourism entrepreneur. This guy actually created some of these things, and the one that I was on, he I don't want to say invented it, but he's the one that figured out all of the details of it and put it into practice. Imagine what we talked about those gorillas and all I told you, all of the things that have to go into that. So he created this two-part system here. Also, when I talked about the gorillas, I said it was important that you had other things to do when you were not doing the gorillas. So on your way to get to this national park or on your way back, he discovered this place, these cliffs where the condors would hang out. Andean condors are one of the largest wingspans of any bird on Earth. They can have a 10-foot wingspan. That's almost a small airplane. And I want to tell you what attracted them to this spot was the wind. Here I am up on top of the cliff. Look at this tree. Look how this tree is growing. You can just see the wind in this picture. It was incredible. I have to tell you, I felt like I was going to get blown right off the edge there. And you go up on top of these cliffs and you look down on condors. It was absolutely amazing. I loved it. It was fantastic. But this whole thing was on a piece of private property. So he found where the birds were, approached the landowner, and said, I'd like to bring tourists here. And they get a piece of each action. I don't know, let's make up, let's say 10%, for basically doing nothing. They created this little parking area. They had these primitive bathrooms. And when I say primitive, think outhouses. And because they were allowing people to go onto their property, they'd get a chunk of every person that came on here. And it was perfect. This guy created this. And as people went to the national park or on their way back, depending on the timing of when your plane arrived and such, they would stop at this location. It was just fascinating. Torres del Paine National Park is famous for its pumas. But I want to give you the stats here. The national park is 900 square miles in size. They estimate their population at 50 pumas. Holy cow. How the heck are you going to find those things? Well, you can have a guide or you can get lucky. Or you can be incredibly knowledgeable on your own here. Outside of the national park, there are also pumas, and many of those pumas are feeding on sheep. These are large ranches, estancias as they call them in Espanol, and they are owned by wealthy individuals. It's a long story, but the pumas come and eat their sheep, and some of the ranchers kill the pumas even though it's not legal to do. Well, the ranch that I stayed at was owned by this woman's father and her uncle. This is Danya Goich. And the Goiches decided decades ago that they wanted to get out of the sheep ranching business and into the ecotourism business. They wanted to raise pumas instead of sheep. Now, how do you raise pumas? Well, you encourage wildlife on your property. This is the wild animal that the pumas mostly eat. This is a guanaco. You spell guanaco with a G, but you pronounce it without the G because this is Spanish. And this is the large herbivore of this ecosystem. It looks like a llama, looks like an alpaca. It's in that same group there, but this is a wild animal. Wild but curious. I got this picture with my cell phone. They didn't they weren't bothered by people. And there are so few people that come to this place that I think they were just super curious. What we did is drove around and not only looked for pumas with our own eyes, but listened for guanacos that were giving alarm calls because the only thing that they would alarm would be pumas. They're not alarming when a person shows up. So if we heard a guanaco yelling, then we would stop and try to find the puma that it was yelling at. Now, let me give you an idea of how their business model worked. Because the pumas are not very densely populating, Did I just say that okay? Probably not, because there's so few pumas compared to the square miles. You can't saturate this place with lots and lots of tourists. Think about what they did for the gorillas, right? One group of 8 goes in once a day. So how they did this, the business model was twofold. One, you come and you spend an extended time. No day trippers. No half a day, come see a puma and then go. The problem with short amount of time visiting a place like this is you put an incredible amount of pressure to get it done. Come on, come on. We got to find a puma. We got to find a puma. If I'm there for a week, which is what I did, if I don't see a puma this morning, maybe I'll see one this afternoon or the next day. Turns out we saw pumas every single day. It was never a problem. But my guide was fantastic. The second part is you charge a lot of money. And now I say a lot. It was I'm not rather not give you the exact dollar amount, but it was expensive. I stayed in a room in a lodge that had heat for a few hours uh, each night. They had heat during the night and then no heat during the day, and electricity for this many hours in the morning and this many hours in the afternoon. So I was paying a lot of money not for luxury, but for the experience of what I was getting. And if you can charge more money to fewer people that stay a longer time, that beats many people for a short time for a cheap amount. Do you follow? So that was the business model that they were trying for. Serious individuals that are willing to come and pay for this experience. And so, if, for example, I was the only one. I showed up. They instead of canceling, which they wanted to do, they still allowed me to come, and I had my own private guide. Now, what they do is they have more people. Let's say they have a group of 4 or 5. They will employ 2 guides and a spotter. So you increase the team, right? So I had one. That was just me. It was just Danya and I, and she is the only female puma guide in the entire country of Chile. So I felt pretty happy about that. And let's go back to the Wanacos now. So it's the baby Wanacos, it's the Chilengos that mostly get eaten. And this guy's missing a tail. I don't know if he was already in a scrap with a mountain lion or if he just got it caught in a fence or something crazy. But maybe he's already got a cool story to tell. And when we did find Wanacos that were killed, they were young ones. So we're driving along the road, and all of a sudden a puma jumps up out of the bushes and runs up the hill. And we took some pictures of him. By the time I got a picture of him, this is where he was. But at one time, he was only about 40 yards away from me, and he was hiding in the bushes there with his 2 chilengos that he had killed. So that was that. Let me show you a series here called "How Close Can I Get to a Puma?" And look how close we are to this one. This was great. Another guide had actually spotted this one, and we came upon the scene, and we were at one end, and he was at the other end, and the puma ended up walking past both of us through this like vegetation area, but still not close enough. This one was nice. This was super close. We were on foot on this one and the last one, making this even more special. My gosh, just seeing one mountain lion would be fantastic. Imagine seeing multiple mountain lions every single day and being able to be this close to them on foot. Oh, it's such a great story. I didn't get run over by this animal, so I was very happy. This is the picture I took after that last one. We finally did it. We got within 10 yards of a wild puma. I'll never forget it. I don't remember how much I paid exactly, but I do remember seeing the puma. I would like to take you to one last place. I'd like to go to Borneo. Borneo is called the land below the wind, which is kind of funny because it's named for the direction that the wind blows. So the other people named Borneo because that came from the direction the wind blows is where Borneo was. And I've got 2 yawners right here. I thought that was an interesting thing. Borneo is an island in Southeast Asia. There's actually 3 different countries that own pieces of the island Borneo. We only stayed in the Malaysia part of the island. And I will tell you that Borneo is the oldest forest on the planet. It's older than the Amazon. And one thing that it has, because of its tropical location, is a lot of stuff that can bite you. So instead of mosquitoes, it was leeches. And I want you to notice Laura there is wearing some leech socks. So imagine taking a Christmas stocking and putting it on the outside of your pants and then putting your foot into your shoe. This is a way to keep the leeches out of your body. And just getting there was a bit of an adventure. We landed in Hong Kong and we stayed overnight there. We toured the city a little bit. Danica was hoping to do a study abroad in Hong Kong, so she wanted to get a little tour, a little taste of it, and she did. She actually spent a semester living in Hong Kong after this. We flew on Malaysia Airline, and I'm not sure you guys remember that there were two disasters that happened. One was a plane that was shot down, a Malaysian airline plane that was shot down over Russia, over the Ukraine, and then another Malaysian airline plane went missing and still hasn't been found. We flew on the 1 year anniversary of that. But the animals that were there were just absolutely spectacular. Uh, Indian elephants, as opposed to the African elephant I showed you earlier. Some great birds that we got to see, and stuff that wasn't mammal or birds. We did a lot of night hiking because there's a lot of stuff that's only available out at night. The lodges were fantastic, wooden structures for the most part, and just carved into the jungle, right? So just keeping the jungle as much as possible, and we'd see things right outside of our windows. We didn't even have to go out on a hike. And because Borneo is such an ancient forest, they have a lot of gliding animals that go from tree to tree. Like, for example, there's 9 species of flying squirrel that are there. The flying snake, flying frog, flying lizard, all of those things live in Borneo. And my favorite picture that I took of a flying squirrel is this one right here. That's a real picture. I know he looks like he's got headlights on, but I'm using my flash. It's a little bit dark, and he jumped and just happened to sail right over us. And after many, many crappy pictures, I was able to get that one amazing one. So one of the main draws for people is the orangutan, and orangs are a primate that is on the decline for a couple of reasons. And the very first ones that we saw were in this rehabilitation center. Now they're being rehabilitated medically, not not behaviorally. These are for either injured or orphaned orangutans. And they're in a semi-wild kind of a situation. There's no fence around this, but these animals don't really want to go anywhere because they're getting fed here. He's eating sugarcane, for example, right here. So although was born in the wild and literally can go wherever he wants, he's just a bit more on the tame side for me. My special orangutan sightings were not from these guys. Orangutan basically translates to old man of the forest, and if you look at him, he does look like an old man there. The only orangs that were actually kept in fences were the daycare ones. So when they come in and they're orphaned and they're so young that they have to keep a constant watch on them, they have them in this pen here. And we were inside a big glass structure, and part of that was to keep us away from them when they're younger. Maybe they're a little bit more sensitive to disease and such. They got fed every day. Some of the orangutans are older and wiser and don't and come to the feeding platforms any longer, but others just sit and wait and wait and wait. They know the beans are coming, and I'm going to just sit and wait for them to come. So for a lot of people, this was their only experience with orangutans. They would see them and they'd be happy with it. They saw wild orangutans, even though they were being fed and they had been injured and they were kind of used to people. This was their experience. But we went here, supported it. Glad our money went to helping them, but we did get some nice wild orangutan uh, uh, experiences as well. The big problem in Borneo is palm oil plantations. Palm oil is so lucrative that they're illegally cutting down rainforests and growing palms in the place. This is what a palm oil plantation looks like that's in the process of being created. Now, this particular one had not been carved out of raw jungle. This was a plantation that was being converted over to palm oil, and I want to talk about that in just a minute with you guys. This is what palm oil dates look like. Here's a couple in Laura's hand up close and personal there. And when you look at the plantation, you can see it would be like being in an apple orchard. You don't really want stuff growing up underneath it at all. And palm oil is used in so many different things. If you eat chocolate, you eat palm oil. If you have applesauce, you have palm oil. If you have margarine or all kinds of different things, Oreo cookies, you eat palm oil. So I want you to think about this next little piece that I'm going to tell you guys here. So a lot of people are calling for uh, boycotting palm oil or trying to find sustainable palm oil. And the one of our guides when we were in Borneo said, you know, that is only part of the story. What do you think will happen if everyone stopped buying palm oil tomorrow? Do you think we would just all let these go back to jungle? We would just have to plant something else. He said before palm oil they were rubber trees, and now people use synthetic rubber, so we replace it with palm oil. And he made an excellent point, and one that I tried to make with you guys over and over again. And that was that you have to make the wildlife valuable. And if you don't, you can't just create laws that say, or pretend that you can sit here in New York State and not buy palm oil and help an orangutan. They're going to need to do something else. And hell, thank God it's not firewood, right? Let's glad they're not cutting down forests over and over again. So if we stop buying palm oil, they will just plant a different crop there. We have to make something be a substitute for that. And for me, often it's that tourist industry. I do want to point out just a couple more things, and I'm going to let you guys go. This was another place. This was right next to the orangutans, and I really wanted to see a sun bear in the wild, and I did not. Although this still was a highlight for me. All of these bears that were at this conservation center were all rescues. Some of them were rescued from live markets where they were being sold. Others were found orphaned. And this entire operation is the work of one wealthy individual. He's a physician, and he has a passion for sun bears. So he himself has created a sun bear conservation organization, and he's starting with rescuing these guys, and he's doing camera trap surveys to try to see what their population is. There's no governmental agency that's doing the baseline work that wildlife professionals would do. It's all being done by this individual who just has a passion for this species. And it was just amazing to watch. And I can't think of a U.S. story that would be the same. Name an animal that's being managed basically by one rich individual, right? I can tell you all kinds of stories where rich Americans buy property, right, and then have wildlife on it. But this was just an amazing story. I was happy to contribute and go and visit this and learn about the great work that they were doing. But this was not an animal that's on my life list because I never got to see one in the wild. This is going to be my last story for you from Borneo, and this is a place where we went to a sanctuary for proboscis monkeys. So proboscis monkeys are only found in Borneo. This gentleman bought this land because he was going to build condos on it. And some people approached him and let him know that the proboscis monkeys were living here and suggested that he try to make money off of the monkeys instead of by building condos. And he did. And it's a successful business. And I have absolutely no idea if he is making more money or less money. But we did not get to meet him. But our guide was telling us how satisfying this is for this individual that he's feels like he's contributing to his homeland by keeping this property here and these animals alive rather than just building more condos. This is an animal that's in serious decline. Just in the last 30 years, they have reduced their population down to only 20% of what it was. And that's why they're called proboscis monkeys, because of the giant schnozola there. This is what the males look like. There's a nickname for these guys. They're called Dutch monkeys. And they're called Dutch monkeys because they dress like the Dutch sailors did. They wore a shirt, they wore pants, They had a big nose and they were red in the face like the drunk Dutch sailors. This is what the females look like. They're a little bit more dainty looking, and the babies as well are different still. Cool. Anyway, I hope you guys have enjoyed this look at a whole bunch of different ways of managing things. I hope you stuck with me. This is the longest video that I've done during this spring craziness here. So, thanks all.